the folks who are really getting burnt out and overwhelmed, need a lifeboat first, and then, but what's really going to move them forward, the quantum leap in their business to jump from, where they are to where they want to be on the next rung of the ladder, or several rungs of the ladder up, is through that identity shift and shifting their priorities and how they're thinking about it, who they're showing up to work as, not just the individual contributor that they've been when they're growing their business on the front end, but being the leader who can inspire their team, who can build their team, who can identify the right people, bring the right skills into the team, right? That requires a different set of priorities and how they're showing up for the day. So they're not blocking out huge chunks of their time for the individual contributor work, where they're really working on the strategy, how these things fit together, making sure they're taking care of themselves, that they're sleeping enough so that they can show up with a clear head at work. All of those things are factors, right? And that's why the identity piece is so critical, because it's not like you're just showing up for work. Like, your sleep absolutely determines how well you're thinking that day. What you ate the day before can determine how you're, whether you have brain fog or not, right? All of these things are part of who you are as a leader. And it's not, life doesn't have to all be about work.
Papaya! Hello all, and welcome to another episode of Transform Your Future with me, Eddie Isin, where I sit down with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and high achievers as they identify areas I can improve on and guide me to further my self-improvement practice. For more information and insights, join my newsletter at transformyourfuture.com, where I write about reinvention, personal growth, and entrepreneurship. If you like the show, you'll love the content on my site. We want to hear from you. Let us know how we can improve your listening and viewing experience. Suggest upcoming topics, or maybe you know a great guest for the show. Please reach out to us through our website, your podcast app, comment, or just text me directly at 813-722-1417. We really want to hear from you. Today, we're tackling a topic that hits home for so many of us, especially if you're a solopreneur or small business owner, or even someone working a business inside of a business like a commission-only salesperson. It's all about navigating the complex, often overwhelming world of business growth. Now, I've written a detailed article on the key points discussed in this episode with available resources on the transformyourfuture.com blog. In this episode titled Battling Entrepreneurial Burnout, Bring Brilliance to Balance, episode 29, my guest is Eric Williams, the brilliant mind behind Willity, a company dedicated to helping business owners systematize, delegate, and scale their operations effectively. Eric and I dive into the nitty-gritty of the challenges that plague many business owners. We're talking about the balancing act between skyrocketing sales and client fulfillment. We also dig into the overload and burnout that come with wearing too many hats. If you're anything like me, you'll probably found yourself juggling several different roles and still feel like you're barely keeping your head above water. Another key area we cover is systemization. Many of us started our business because we're passionate about what we do, not because we're excited about building systems. But the truth is, without standardized processes, scaling becomes an uphill battle. Perhaps one of the most profound parts of our conversation revolves around identity and leadership shifts. Moving from being the do-all entrepreneur to a strategic leader is a major reinvention. It requires a significant mindset shift to make the transition smoothly. Finally, we discuss what it means to feel stuck and how to get unstuck. Whether it's a lack of systemization, delegation, or just feeling overwhelmed, you'll find this episode is packed with valuable insights that you're going to want to write down and implement. Join Eric and I as we transform our futures together.
Great. Well, so we were just talking about when you focus on sales, right? There's a lot of really good stuff in a variety of sales strategies and really dialing in your revenue generation, how much profit you're making, really being able to dial that in. But one of the things that can happen when you are really dialing in the sales process is that you actually get too much success. You have too much success, get too much traction, things start to move, and then you have to do the client fulfillment. You have to, maybe bring on 1, 2, 3 more people to fulfill the work, do the work. And that's where a lot of folks can get stuck, where they're
Mm-hmm.
really they get overloaded in their schedule all of a sudden and don't have time to figure out how to operationalize and systematize the business to a point where they can actually fulfill those orders coming
Yeah.
in. So I always think of it as a kind of a 1-2 punch or a dual strategy where you need to be mindful about the fulfillment of the work, the rest of the operations of the business, while you're thinking about the sales strategy as well. Because
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
the best case scenarios of a good sales strategy is actually getting that big client or getting a lot of clients in the door very
Mm-hmm.
quickly, right? And so that's
Yeah.
a really good situation to be in, except that you then need to figure out how to do the rest of the work as well.
Yeah, and I want to just say that, when I say the word sales strategy, I mean actually working with a business to develop an actual sales strategy of how we're going to create the lead flow
Yeah.
from, 3 or 4 different strategies of lead flow to then how we're going to take care of the actual process of communicating with those people to take them to a close, right? To actually give them all the information they need so that they could sign up, sign on, and do whatever is necessary. And yes, fulfillment obviously is a big part of that, right? Which is why usually, personally, I only work with companies who already are fulfilling. They already have a process set up for that, and they're just looking to kind of build out a sales team of commission only salespeople and manage that team so that they don't have to do it. Because a lot of times these small or medium sized businesses, they're wearing 15 different hats, and I don't know if you can identify with this, but when I did that, it was completely overwhelmed. It was why I worked 60, 70, 80 hours a week, freaking myself out, running around like a chicken with my head cut off, because I wore 15 different hats and I had to keep switching hats. And it's not a just good way to go forward. I found it much better when I could delegate and focus on the things that I'm really good at, which in my case happened to be the sales. So I focused on doing the sales and bringing the people in and closing deals, while I let other people handle fulfillment and things like that. I didn't get involved in that. I set up, you set up your baseline, and you set up your templates and how you want things done and delivered, but then you let it go. So but I agree with you. Sometimes clients out there grab some new lead gen strategy and they start running it, and then they get a bunch of people interested, and they get stuck in scope. Right? They have scope creep that goes on all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you hit the nail on the head as well, that a lot of the times folks who are really early in their business, it could be when you are still solo, maybe a small team, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes you can get up to 10, 15 without really having a good standard practice in terms of your delivery of your work or your sales practice, and you're still doing things ad hoc. You kind of fell into having a reasonably successful business, but then getting your own schedule kind of creeping in, as you said, scope creep, and the role creep, and how you kind of put your hands in everything to keep control of the business. One of the things that also gets in the way of entrepreneurs being able to grow and scale is not stepping back from that day-to-day operational piece of the business so that
Mm-hmm.
they can focus on the most important thing, which, when you're building a growing business, if you want to grow and scale that business, you need to figure out your lead flow, you need to figure out your
Mm-hmm.
sales strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're spending 60, 80 hours just keeping the business afloat, you really just don't have the brain power, the energy to solve really what is sometimes a complicated problem, or
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a complicated problem, but one, the sales and revenue strategy is really sometimes you're trying to finely tune the dial, and sometimes just being 95% correct leads no leads, and you get that last couple percentage points, and then it really, then it really moves. But if you don't have the brain power and the time to really be able to focus on those key pieces that are going to drive the business forward, that's where you get in trouble. So a lot of
Yeah.
my work is
Yeah.
really around how do you get business owners out of that day-to-day piece as much as
Yeah.
they can, as much as they're trying to, have all of those hats. How can they hand off one of those hats? How can they hand off two of those hats, delegate it, or automate a piece of the puzzle so that they can focus on really the thorny problems in the business? Because anything that is routine really shouldn't be handled by the business owner beyond a
Mm-hmm.
very early stage of the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I was younger, I had several different businesses I was involved in, and usually I had a partner. And we had clearly delineated lines of what our responsibilities were, and how things worked, and those relationships worked well. When I went off to do it all on my own, and at the time, my goal was to open up a production company and start writing, producing, and directing, and calling shots, and being the guy who told the stories and had control over everything. I guess this was because I felt that I didn't have control previously getting involved with people, and I wanted to be the boss. But anyhow, when I got involved, I just never really took into consideration, like, you have to have a business, you have to have a business structure, you have to, delineate different things. You need to bring on a team. You need to, there was all these different things. And so when I built the business, unfortunately, it took me a couple of years to get out of this. But when I built the business, it was all about me, and everybody wanted to work with me, and I had to be involved in every job because they were asking for me, because they saw my work and they wanted me to, see what I could do for them as a creative genius to make things work for them so they can make more money or reach their goals or whatever. And boy, it took me a couple of years to really figure out how to remove myself from all that, because I basically just created a very high functioning, well paid job for myself, not a business. So I hear
Oh,
you. I hear you. There's a lot of mindset shift and work. And if I would have brought on somebody like yourself, I probably would have been able to do it a lot faster than the year or two that it took me to really break all that down myself. Um, but yeah, definitely beneficial, definitely very important. And I would say the biggest thing was for me that the way I work, I need to be in that creative mind space, because it is through my active creation and conceptualizing things that really all the success for the company actually comes. And the more I'm in that day to day grind of things, I can't really activate that part of my brain. So that was the biggest reward for me, was freeing me up so that I could be a little bit relaxed and, do that. And I created some really great concepts, in that really pushed the needle really far for us. But, um,
yeah.
Eric,
That's interesting. And
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
oh, yeah, that's I mean, this is spurring a lot of the same things that I do a lot of work with folks on, but really where your genius is around that creation piece, not the running of the business, right? A lot of folks
Mm-hmm.
are really great at a particular thing and they make that into a business, but if you can't translate what the real goal of the business, you can make a job for yourself. There's no problem with that
Mm-hmm.
if that's the kind of business and job you want, and kind of keep it small and focused that way. That's totally fine as a business model. But if that's not your goal, if you really want to have a business, a system that is getting those outcomes, that's where you really have to do the fun and creative work. I think it's really the fun and creative work where you're replicating your genius, your brilliance, the secret sauce that you're bringing to your business.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how do you make that a systematic outcome of the
Right.
business where you take it from you have the formula
Yeah.
inside your brain. It's a equation, however you want, a recipe, however you want to think about it. You have
Mm-hmm.
that recipe that's been able to, the spark that has started the business.
Mm-hmm.
The challenging part is translating that into something you can do repeatedly,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like a recipe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a family recipe. Maybe it's been something you've been putting together for
Mm-hmm.
years. Maybe you've never written it down. It's habitual for you. So you
Right.
know exactly how to do it, what ingredients go in, what quality of ingredients you're putting in there, the
Mm-hmm.
exact amount of time that you're doing. You maybe never written any of this stuff down. You just do it instinctually. And that's what a lot of
Yeah.
business owners do. And as they're getting started early in their business, sometimes they're fine-tuning it too, but they don't necessarily write it down.
Yeah.
And if you don't write it down in some form or document it in some form, it's not really scalable. So
Yeah.
so you can do that all day long. You can cook that meal, bake that pie, whatever it is for you. You can do that all day long yourself. But if you want to make a business out of it and have other people do that for you have to be able to download all of those fun, interesting details, the nuance, the subtle decision making that you're making through the
Mm-hmm.
process. Do I have enough flour in this or not? Or do I need to
Right.
add just like a pinch more of this thing?
Right.
Right? All of those nuanced
Yeah.
details. You have to figure out and really think deeply about what's going into those decision makings because it's absolutely replicable. It's just a huge challenge for a lot of folks when they're getting started. They think, well, I'm the only
Mm-hmm.
one who can solve this problem. I'm the only one that can do this. I'm the only one who knows how to do it. And every time I've delegated it, it's gone terribly. And part of
Mm.
that is because you don't have a recipe. You don't have the clear
Right.
how the decisions are made,
Yes.
what the exact steps are, what the exact ingredients are, and throughout the process, how you're making those subtle distinctions, subtle shifts in the strategy to get to the outcome you're looking for.
Yeah.
Right. So all of that goes into it. It's not just really the nuts and bolts. It's about the decision making, the values through the process to get to the outcome.
Yeah, I think the I like the analogy of recipe. I've heard this before, and I do like the analogy of the recipe, since obviously, if the recipe says put 2 cups of sugar and you only put one or you put three, it's going to completely change the outcome of what it tastes like, right? I'll tell you something real quick, just a little story of how I started the process of systematizing and creating a system that was duplicatable by other people. And I will say that one thing that I was thinking about when you were talking was also, it's not just what I'm building and duplicating a process that someone else can do to serve my customer, but also the sales process and how that sales process is going to work and become duplicatable, right?
Yeah.
But how I did it in the beginning was, um, and I don't know exactly how I landed on this, but I developed the first time I did it. I developed a TV show, and the TV show was a local show for the 3 county, 4 county area where I reside, and it was about restaurants, attractions, and entertainment venues. So I went ahead and as I built out that show and I started talking to people, I started to systematize it and conceptualize it. So the show was a concept that had a certain demographic of customers that we would be talking to that would participate in the show, and I created the concept from beginning to end of how you do it, how it works out, and systematize that so that somebody else can shoot it and edit it, and somebody else could, post it and, run the website and all those types of things. And somebody else could sell it, with a pitch deck and all that kind of stuff. So, and like that became the way I did everything after that. So it was almost like it was almost like, in a way, I had 4 or 5 different sections of my business that were all systematized for a different show or a different, marketing concept or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I know I interrupted you before. Well, what did you want to jump into?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say, hey, Eric, welcome to Transform Your Future podcast.
I know we missed that. Thank you, Eddie. We missed
No
that in the beginning.
problem.
We just started talking.
Yes, sir. So tell me a little bit about a 10,000 foot overview of what you do to help small businesses to systematize and organize and change from being a burnt out, frustrated kind of job into an actual business structure where they have the freedom to develop things and organize things and, get fulfillment in their life.
Great. Yeah. So I've been doing this work for many, many years. Throughout my career, it's one of those things when you're an entrepreneur and when you're a coach and an advisor, everything in your career is adding into the richness of what I can provide in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
background. But I've been able to hire and manage over 1,000 high performance employees. I've advised over 300 executives and entrepreneurs in the space of leadership and systems development. And what I really do is take entrepreneurs who are really struggling with that transition from being that scrappy startup solopreneur and translating their business into something that's scalable and replicable.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks get stuck in those early days when they get traction, when they get that first client or the first big client or the first
Mm-hmm.
big handful of clients.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have to dig in on actually doing the work, fulfilling the work that they've promised. And a lot of the times that they get into a weird cycle where they don't have enough time to focus on growing the revenue because they're spending so much time doing the work. And it can very easily get trapped in the cycle of just 1 week of emergencies or one new client where you have to pull out that extra 10, 20, 30, 40 hours that week, right? We've
Mm-hmm.
all been there and needing to hustle that week to get something done. Things go on the back burner, but then those things that weren't emergencies before become emergencies, and you quickly get into this cycle of just constantly putting out fires, dealing with impending deadlines, and really just trying to keep your head above
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
And so that happens to so many entrepreneurs who are getting started is when they don't have the ability to systematize, delegate, automate their work, if they haven't thought that through and have a game plan to how to work through when I get this client, I've been doing it this way for this point, and maybe it's when you have that first new hire three hires on board, to jump from there to having a team of 5 or 10. You have to go through this growth journey. So you have to make sure you
Mm-hmm.
have enough time allocated in your schedule that you're not just keeping your head above water. Because if you get
Mm-hmm.
into that space where you're just keeping your head above water to just barely get enough clients in the door,
Yeah.
and you're not, sacrificing your sleep, your health, that doesn't get easier over time. Sometimes we trick ourselves into thinking, well, it's just a busy week. Well, that
Mm-hmm.
busy week sometimes turns into a busy month. It sometimes turns into a busy 6 months or a year. And then you start to get burnt out, exhausted. You haven't been taking care of yourself. You haven't been sleeping. And it just goes downhill from there, because then all of a sudden your capacity is not at 100. It sinks to 90%, then 80%, then 50%. And you're just grinding through the day. And so that's where I really help folks reset their business and rebuild their business so that it really works for them. But they have to have that commitment to say, I really can't do this anymore. It's not going to get easier. I need to reset my business for the next journey, the next phase of
Mm-hmm.
growth. Systematize, delegate, automate the pieces of work, and change your identity through that process. Because the entrepreneur that goes from, starting to that first new hire or that first big client, you need to shift your identity moving forward. And so that's a huge chunk of
Yeah.
the work as well, because it's all those thousands of different decisions that you're making throughout the day, throughout the week, that really impact how the whole, how the whole week goes, how
Mm-hmm.
the whole month goes.
How I show up on the day to day dictates where we're going and what's going to happen. Absolutely, 100%. And it's interesting. I talk a lot about reinvention and about identity. I write about it on my blog, and I find it very interesting actually, because I would say, like most of the solopreneurs and commission only salespeople I work with, to help them to build these strategies and use these tactics to double their income, triple their income right away as far as sales go. Um, I often tell a lot of them, I think probably it's time for you to take a really good look here to change your personality. Right? Like, you have to start asking yourself, am I a good communicator? Can I attract the right people? Can I build the team? Can I get people, excited about moving forward on this thing? And sometimes just getting, like you were talking about, being burnt out, frustrated, going 100 miles an hour, feeling overwhelmed, that doesn't really make for good communication, in your organization, and not such good leadership. So, yeah, I hear you. Taking a look at my role in that and my identity in that is vital moving forward. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that I don't always talk about. I think it's, if potentially the most important piece of the puzzle is how you're showing up to the work, because it determines all of the other decisions you're making throughout the day,
Mm-hmm.
where you focus on your learning and development, skilling up,
Mm-hmm.
how you're making decisions about who to hire, maybe who to let go, what the business needs to look like moving forward. Those all
Mm-hmm.
come from these thousand different decisions that you make throughout the day. And
Mm-hmm.
those are informed by your values and your identity.
Mm.
And I don't normally talk about this, because entrepreneurs who are in this phase of being burnt out and overwhelmed, they just don't, this is not on their radar. They
Mm-hmm.
don't sit down and say, well, I've been working 100 hours a week for the last few months. I really need an identity shift, right? That's not how people are thinking in that moment. They say, I just need, I need a life raft.
Mm-hmm.
I need a
Yeah.
life vest. I'm drowning.
Yeah.
That's what I need right now. And so that's usually why we start in straight on the mechanics first, is just fixing the schedule, fixing the priorities, really the nuts and bolts right early on, because
Mm-hmm.
those are the types of things they need, right? The folks
Mm.
who are really getting burnt out and overwhelmed, need a lifeboat first, and then, but what's really going to move them forward, the quantum leap in their business to jump from, where they are to where they want to be on the next rung of the ladder, or
Mm-hmm.
several rungs of the ladder up, is through that identity shift and shifting their
Mm.
priorities and how they're thinking about it, who they're showing up to work as, not just
Mm-hmm.
the individual contributor that they've been when they're growing their business on the front
Mm-hmm.
end, but being the leader who can inspire their team, who can build their team, who can identify the
Mm-hmm.
right people, bring the right skills into the team, right? That requires a different set of priorities and how they're showing up for the
Yeah.
day. So they're not blocking out huge chunks of their time for the individual contributor work, where they're really
Mm-hmm.
working on the strategy, how these things fit together, making sure
Mm.
they're taking care of themselves, that they're sleeping enough so that they can show up with a clear head at work. All of those things are factors, right? And that's why the identity piece is so critical, because it's not like you're just showing up for work. Like, your sleep absolutely determines how well you're thinking that day.
Mm-hmm.
What you ate the day before can determine
Mm-hmm.
how you're, whether you have brain fog or
Absolutely.
not, right? All of these
Yeah.
things are part of who you are as a leader. And it's not, life doesn't have to all be about work, but
Yeah.
your work absolutely has factors in all of these other pieces. And so that's why the identity shift has such huge implications, because you're starting to then fix other parts of your life as well to align with what's really your priority.
Okay. We're going to do a quick speed round. Um, I want you to quickly, in less than a minute, just tell me the top three things that you would tell a solopreneur or somebody working a business inside of a business to do the mindset shifts that you're talking about right there,
The top three reasons why they should,
or what the top three things
what
they
the
should
top
look
three
at.
things they should be looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the top three things to look at when you're really trying to make that identity shift is look at, if you were the kind of business owner that you want to be and need to be for the next stage, you basically need to shift into that mode and be the next stage of business owner and make decisions from that point of view. That's really a key piece of the puzzle, where you have to move forward even if you are not there yet. You have to be operating as if you were that in that place, and because you need to find the skills, you need to make the decisions
Mm-hmm.
that are going to get you there. So that's one of the big components. The other thing is sitting down and really figuring out what you do well, where you work, how you operate, understand yourself, understand where you feel like your limitations are, where your constraints are, so you can bring your full self to this. Because if you're trying to work really outside of your unique skill set, then you either need
Mm-hmm.
to fix that skill set or bring someone on the team to fill that. But understanding yourself is a huge factor in this as well, to
Mm-hmm.
understand where your priorities are, where you're operating from, so that you can go in with a clear head. And
Okay.
then a third one, maybe I'm going to blank on a third one.
Three just
Just do
sounds like
those
a good
two.
number. That's fine.
Yeah.
Two is good. So when you're out working with customers, do you have limitations that you're looking for, some like baseline, like you need to be a business that's been in business for a certain period of time, or at a certain level of income, or or gross sales or whatever? Do you have some limitations in there?
I don't. And it's actually more of a limitation on the top end than on the bottom end,
Mm.
just because I work with a lot of folks who are solopreneurs early in their business journey. I think the biggest client that I've worked with had around 100 employees in four
Mm-hmm.
different offices around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things that people can. So she had been able to build this one with 100 employees. She had been able to build this, that had sunk into those bad habits, those things that spiraled out of control, where she kind of lost control over her priorities, her schedule, got overwhelmed, and deep in this, and really needed a reset, to reset the business to where it needed to be for. And she'd been in business for 30 years. So you can imagine there's businesses like this where you'd need a reset at some point. You need,
Yeah.
even if you've been operating and it's been going well, sometimes things start to shift, things start to slide, things start to be more emergencies. You just need a reset to get there.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I think the detail, interesting that we started off talking about revenue and sales strategy. That's one of the things that I am not an expert in. And so when I'm looking at folks that I can help, there are a couple different ways this manifests. If they don't have a really good strategy for generating revenue, and they're that early on and they haven't gotten traction in their business, so that they have,
Mm-hmm.
that first client or the first couple clients
Mm-hmm.
or the, handful of early customers, if they don't have a strategy that they can focus and shift into, that's
Yeah.
a little bit difficult place to be in. So that's really where you need to get that traction first. And I say
Mm-hmm.
that because, not because we can't solve the business operations, but one of the things I find very valuable is to build the business operations as the business is growing, because you don't want to build a conceptual business. You want to
Mm-hmm.
build a business that works in practice, because when you're
Mm-hmm.
actually in there doing the work, you're going to
Yes.
find those nuance, those details that are important. If you build
Mm-hmm.
it in concept and build this kind of big kind of architecture inside the business to handle the growth, it may not work when you actually do the work and get that first client in the door.
Yes.
Like no
Yeah.
plan. I forget who said it. General Patton, maybe. No plan survives first encounter with the enemy, or whatever the quote is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's why building it as you go, and having the flexibility in there to build as you grow, knowing what direction it needs to go, but actually doing the nuts and bolts as you grow. So that's important. I think I'm giving you a long answer. I forgot this was speed round, but
No, it's
really
okay.
on the
We're
short
out.
end,
We're
it's
out the speed round. We're
like
out the speed round.
yeah, have an idea. Or if you're really so deep in fulfilling the work for your clients and customers that you just don't have time to even figure it out, that's another area I can help. But that's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit less common. Usually I'm looking for folks who have a decent revenue strategy, revenue growth
Mm-hmm.
strategy, sales strategy, that they may need to jump in and dial in. It doesn't have to be super dialed in. It's just that, if you're going to grow, you have to have an idea of that. Because if we fix the business operations and they're running at peak efficiency, but you still don't know how to get clients and customers in the door,
Yeah.
then there's not really you're not going to be able to grow, because you have to go and figure that part out too.
Sure, sure. At least they have to have at least one strategy that's working. I typically preach that, I have like 7 different lead gen strategies that you could use. And I typically preach that you need to have 3 or 4 that you're working on all the time.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes I find they're just working on one. They have one lead strategy. That's it. And they just wait for that one to dictate everything. And so I immediately help them by, let's add some more strategies to that. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that. They need to be able to, and interestingly enough, I think that a lot of businesses actually have something that's workable that they're doing. They just need to take that next step to actually systemize it and ask those questions. You got to ask yourself those questions. What is it I really am trying to do here? What is it that's really my forte? What's my special ingredient that I bring to this? What's my talent? What's my gift? And what did I really want this thing to do? Because certainly I know when I started out and I started getting overwhelmed, after a year or so, that is not what I wanted. That was not the goal that I was working on, and I certainly wanted more freedom and to be able to work at a much higher level. And I actually had this idea that my business was going to give me a gateway to get to somewhere else that I was trying to actually get to. And then I got stuck on this level and wasn't able to go to where I really wanted to go to. So definitely I could see the value in working with somebody like you in consulting and getting some of those questions, answering some of those questions so I could change things. Um, let's talk a little bit about what do you think? Why don't you just share a story? Like I know you were sharing a story about the female entrepreneur before with the 100 employees. Give me a kind of a case study of a successful leadership process where you streamline their workload.
Yeah. Yeah. One client that I worked with recently so she had gotten into this. Her company is 15 or so employees. I don't remember all like the precise
Yeah.
number. She's in that ballpark, and really where she was still, she'd been able to build this from scratch, had experience in this industry, and had been working in this industry for a long time. So she had the expertise to really be able to deliver a quality product for the clients that they work with,
Mm-hmm.
and knew what parts of the team that she was really looking for. So she was able to grow it to this point. But when I talked to her, it was really a problem of, just feeling trapped in the business. So the business, she was getting a lot out of it, the kind of personal satisfaction that you do from doing really great work. But she was still stuck in working 60, 80 hours a week, and really just not seeing the opportunity for any backup on the team. Even though she had a substantive team at that point, really just couldn't figure out how to get herself out of all of the pieces. She had her hand essentially in all parts of the business, and she just couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And in that case, she was exhausted. She was not bringing her best work to the role, because she was constantly having to work. If someone didn't do the job right, she was working an extra 3-4 hours, the
Mm-hmm.
night before a client presentation to get it done. So these things that were becoming emergencies, where she would have to fall in as backup
Mm-hmm.
and backup at last minute, right? So those are some of the worst case situations,
Mm-hmm.
where not only do you have to be back, like redo the work that someone on the team is doing, but you also have to do it on a time that you don't get to choose, right? You have to do it
Right.
right before the client meeting, so that whatever you're planning to do that night, off the
Yeah.
table, right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so that was the situation. And, she was also worried about, while her husband wasn't having any health issues at the time, that was a worry that, what if something were to happen again? And what if there was another health emergency, or an aging parent to take care of, or something else that really threw a wrench in that
or
time,
your
right?
own
Because if there's any
personal
emergencies,
health. Yeah.
yeah, your own personal health, right? Like, what if you have a heart attack because you're working so
Mm-hmm.
much? What if your high blood pressure gets the best of you because of the stress that you're under for
Mm-hmm.
years and years, right? This is not uncommon in this kind of situation where you have these health problems that pop up. And this is why I say it's not, if you don't get it fixed now, if it's feeling stressful, if you feel overworked and overwhelmed, you're not going to overwork and overwhelm yourself out of that. And so you can't just grind your way through the work to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what most people do, because they start to lose the brain power, willpower to actually do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of the situation where she just recognized that she needed a reset in her business, and just to focus in and prioritize taking a look in her business. And so we went in, did the initial assessment in her business, saw all of the workflow, the lines that were running through her. And we do a process called structured deconstruction, where we take apart all parts of that, whatever. In her case, it was her role. So we started with her as opposed to the business, kind of the macro sense of the business, starting with her and solve it for
Yeah.
her, because she needed to solve it for herself first. And then we could propagate it through the rest of the business, which is what we're
Sure.
working on now. And so in that case, we just had to kind of blow apart her schedule, take a look at all the pieces, and start to rebuild it, and actually look line by line, see what's in there. Where can we give it a job? Are there opportunities to automate this, systematize this?
Mm-hmm.
Where can you do a recorded video walkthrough of this, so you don't have to keep training everybody on it every day or every
Mm-hmm.
week, or every time someone has a question on it? So building in these habits and routines too,
Mm-hmm.
to rebuild her schedule, her kind of day-to-day priorities, as well as looking at her identity shift, because that was a big component of the work as well, right? Like, once we did the mechanics and saved her that first 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours a week in her schedule in the mechanics, then we look at her identity and say, how do you need to be showing up here? How have you been making decisions in the past, and how have those limited what options you thought were on the table? And so that was mind blowing for her, because those are where the magic happened, because all of a sudden her brain starts to shift into a different problem solving mode, where it's not just the things that we fixed together, but she's looking at the dozen more things that are coming across her plate and saying, what can I do with this? What can I do with this? What can I do with this? It's just the shift in how she's solving the problem, understanding that she has the tool belt, the tools to be able to solve it, but that she can go in and make those decisions quicker, faster, and automate, systematize things from the
Mm-hmm.
get-go, rather than needing to sit down with this bigger kind of unpacking her schedule kind of reset piece. And so moving forward, she was able to move around people on her team, delegate chunks of the work. She hired someone new on the team to really kind of take out a bigger chunk that was out of her schedule, delegating a bigger chunk. And a lot of the times I find, and it was the case with her, that we had to build a stage strategy, where we had to do a stage one, essentially, which is the lower hanging fruit, the stuff that was easier to solve, get that out of her schedule, save that first 10, 15, 20 hours a week on her schedule, so that she can reinvest some of that time in growing the revenue, getting some new clients in the door, so that she can hire someone new to delegate a bigger chunk of her work too, right? So that's why there's this stage strategy. And so when we go to work, we really focus on that first stage right away, and give people a plan, a game plan, business systems game plan, to be able to understand what that stage up strategy looks like, moving beyond the first couple months into a year, 2 year time frame, depending on what they need and what those precursor strategies are.
Mm. Yeah, I hear that. I'm just thinking about that. That's a lot. I mean, you just went over so much, really. And I think, interestingly enough, I feel like for myself, I made sacrifices. I made sacrifices consciously. I said, well, I'm going to sacrifice this. I'll sacrifice that. Maybe, go in and get a checkup, and, follow up appointments and see a specialist. Maybe I put that stuff off, and I'll worry about it later once I get, to some area where I have more free time or whatever. But I would say, you used the word retreat. No, actually, you used reset. You used the word reset several times, and I like that concept. I also like the concept of retreat, right? That sometimes I need a retreat so that I can reset and reinvent this area of whatever. And I took many resets, and the first time I really did it, what I came out of it with was that I really needed to take care of myself first. That if I don't take care of me and my health and get my mind right every day and own the first part of my day, the first hour and a half, 2 hours of my day, then I'm no good anyway. And so that was a big shift for me, just shifting and pivoting to that and taking the first hour and a half to 2 hours of every day to take care of my health, my well-being, my mindset, and my process of what I ritualized in the mornings. Then that shifted a lot of things for me personally. So I really see the value of really looking at these things, taking a look at the personal workload first, what personally I'm doing, what does my day look like. I often mess around with people and I say, wouldn't it be great if I could just spend like 18 hours with you, from the time you wake up to the time to go to bed, so I could just watch everything that you're doing and then I could comment intelligently. But of course, that's a restrictive thing for most people, and the cost would be a little bit ridiculous maybe to actually have somebody available for you 18 hours a day. But I think my point is that we need to, as individuals, we really need to have that kind of high level view of what we're doing and observe what we're doing, what we're thinking, how we're acting, and where we're spending our time, and how we feel during the day. Because it's those feelings, those thoughts, those ideas is what we need to make the shift from. Right. If you're realizing, geez, I'm not spending enough time with my loved ones, that's something that you need to figure out how to shift and prioritize. Right.
Right. Right. Yeah. And Eddie, I think the key detail here is that it's, especially when we're talking about the mindset, the identity, it's not just conceptual kind of theoretical stuff that we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
because that's not going to necessarily help. It's where the rubber meets the road, and you go into work on the details,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where these types of things show up. It's not about, oh, I'd like to spend more time with my family. That's good as
Mm-hmm.
a guiding principle. But then we have to actually need to go in and figure out, well, so where does it go? What gets
Mm-hmm.
cut? What gets changed? Where do things go so that you can make room for that, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
the intention plus the action that you take, and that's how you get the
Mm-hmm.
result. It's not
Yes.
just the intention alone. And so I think a lot, that's also why I tend to shy away from talking about the kind of mindset and identity too much up front, because a lot of people will just say, it kind of feels like it's just a conceptual piece, and it
Yeah.
can be, unless you put action in place to make it happen, and then you can get the result, right? So that's where you have to combine those two in terms of how you're thinking and then actually the actions you're taking, so that you can get the outcome that you're looking for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you said earlier, when you're in that situation where when you're overwhelmed, when you feel like a chicken with your head cut off, just running to the next thing, running to the next thing, you can't really think properly. You can't
Yeah.
really organize properly. You can't really take, a step back and be like, okay, I see, like, I like doing these things over here I don't like doing. So let me find somebody else to do those things because I don't want to do them. Right. And it's just making those little shifts that you're talking about with actions that we take to then go out and hire somebody or subcontract to somebody or whatever to take care of that part that you don't want to deal with.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah. And I
yeah.
think, yeah, and I wanted to call out one of the things that you said specifically that I think was really
Mm-hmm.
interesting, which is when you make it a priority, then you need to find the time and space to be able to think these things through, right? Because if you're
Mm-hmm.
just constantly in emergency mode, putting out fire after fire, as you
Mm.
said, running around with like a chicken with your head cut off, if that's what your whole day looks like, and you haven't prioritized any time to work on the business and on yourself to be able to fix this, then it's not going to change. Right. And so
Sure.
if you're okay being overworked and overwhelmed, and you're not willing to make it a priority, then that's a choice. But
Mm-hmm.
if you want to choose to do something different, then you need to choose those priorities. So it's almost like the identity shift. Parts of the identity shift need to come early, when you recognize this is something I need to change. And
Mm-hmm.
so I may not have a ton of time, especially if I'm working 60, 80 hours a week, but can I dedicate 1 hour? As you said, everybody has that different time. And I actually wanted to loop back to something else you shared as well. Whether it's that first hour or two of the day where you can take ownership over your schedule, be able to write down your priorities, be able to focus on the most important thing that's going to move you forward, not just the stuff that's keeping your head above water. Wherever that is for you, you need to find that and make it a priority. And when you talked about taking care of yourself and what energy you're able to bring, the focus you're able to bring to your work, all of that stuff. I'm sure that you've had times, and you and everybody who's listening have had times where you feel like you're just blazing through work, where you can like get this thing done, get this thing done, get this thing done. And it just feels like everything's moving at light speed. Everything's moving
Mm-hmm.
so fast and your
In the
brain's moving
flow.
so well. You're just in, right, you're in flow. And those are the moments where you can get 2, 3, 4 times more work done.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also times where you're dragging, especially if your body is not in good shape. You have
Mm-hmm.
brain fog, you're tired, all of those things. Those can contribute to you just grinding through the work, but you're maybe operating at 50% capacity. And so if you think about this in terms of a day, if you're instead of grinding through the work and operating at 50% capacity, you have 10 hours, let's say you're working 10 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
50% capacity means you're really only getting 5 hours of work done, effective work done.
Exactly.
And if you really dial in so that you feel good, so that you're focusing on the
Mm-hmm.
work that you love, that you're able to get into flow on, and let's say that is 2 or 3 times more work per hour, if we're really just
Mm-hmm.
doing these on a productivity
Yeah.
basis, which is not always the point, but then 2, 3 times more work done, out of a 10-hour day, that means that you are able to get everything done in, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours or so, right? And so that's what this difference can make, because by investing an hour up front into, making sure you're physically, whether it's exercise, whether it's movement, yoga, whatever it is for you, do that first so that you feel good in your body. That's going to increase your productivity, X%. This is all
Mm-hmm.
predicated on assuming that you're working on the right things. You're not just being productive to be productive, but you're being effective and focusing
Yeah.
on the right things, right? That's why I said
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
bit of an aside on just pure productivity
No,
in
I
your
get
time.
that.
But
Yeah.
once you get in alignment on your energy, your body, your work priorities, what works for you and when and where you work best, that's where you can really get into flow. But you have to do, as I said, the nuts and bolts, and find where those parts, where it is and how you can make it happen in your schedule.
Yeah, I think that's why I mentioned earlier that sometimes it would be a lot quicker and easier if you could just spend 18 hours or 16 hours with somebody from the moment they wake up to go to bed to see what they're actually really doing with their time and what kind of situations they're getting involved in. Because
Yeah.
sometimes I think, as individuals, we're in denial about some things, or maybe we're not entirely honest about some aspects. But I know clearly for myself and with other people I've worked closely with to help them, we waste a lot of time during the day, it seems. Whether that's not really working on a task or a situation or focusing on the things that need to get done, but just talking about ideas or whatever, or, talking about yesterday in the last episode on the TV show, or hey, we were going to go to lunch and taking an hour lunch or whatever. But there are things that we can do. I'm sure that most people can look at their day and look at their schedule and see that there are ways they can make that more productive, for themselves.
Yeah.
Anyway, I
Yeah.
know I found I could.
Yeah, it's so funny because when I was working with a client recently who basically sent me their job description, and I was like, "Oh no, this is not where your day is going." I know. I talked to her for several sessions already. I was like, "This is not what the purpose of the exercise is. Let's look at your day. Let's go, 15-minute, half hour by half hour. What was happening?"
Mm.
And once we did that, she was like, "Oh, this is, it's half the day was
Mm-hmm.
responding to emails, questions from her team,
Yes.
the
Yes.
interruptions on calls, and then having to." You mentioned earlier in our conversation about switching hats so many times during the day.
Mm-hmm.
She was switching hats so many times during the day that the switching cost involved was getting to her as well. When you
Yeah.
take a phone call from someone from a client, and then you have to switch back to what you're doing, it takes 5, 10, 15 minutes
Mm-hmm.
to kind of get back in flow. And then an
Mm-hmm.
email comes in from the team with a question that you've already answered once before. So then, respond to that and then switch back to
Mm-hmm.
work. And so there's just so much inefficiency in that schedule, where she wasn't able to block out time for any deep work, where she wasn't able to even, get through the active work very effectively.
Yeah.
And so once we actually dug in, it's really to your point about, if I could watch someone's full day schedule, there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there that doesn't need to happen. Once you shine a light on it, like once you see
Mm-hmm.
it, all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden you say, "Oh no, this I don't know what's going on in this schedule." Like, no wonder
Mm-hmm.
I'm so overwhelmed and overworked.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you know, I have certain strategies that I have done that have been very helpful, that I share with other people. And one of those strategies, for example, is if there were any customer issues that needed to be taken care of, I always did that at the end of the day. I always scheduled like the last hour and a half, 2 hours of the day. That's when I'm going to deal with anybody's problems. Uh, and I think that, you know, or like email, only doing it, you know, twice a day. Oh God, email is something that I would love to figure out how to fix email. My God. There's been different advances in email technology today. None of them are doing what I want, but I really just wish that I could have an AI that would just delete all the messages that I like deleting all the time, so that I can only see the messages that I want to see, instead of, you know, the 500 emails a day of people trying to remind me or get me to buy something or announcing their new thing.
Yeah.
That would be a product that would like blow up. That would be a product that blow up if it can actually be possible to do, to learn from what I do and then take over for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's where you're going to think about that, just because this is really like a very specific piece of the puzzle, but right. There's strategy, there's
Mm-hmm.
things, tools and support things in email programs, which allow you to sort and filter that. But
Mm-hmm.
especially when you think about the context of decision making, right? Like if you were trying to delegate that to somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
you would have to think through why are you choosing to delete some and not others? AI is a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting exercise for a lot of folks because AI can be really powerful or really not very good. And it really
Mm-hmm.
depends on how much
Mm-hmm.
instruction you're able to give to someone, to the AI to
Mm-hmm.
do the task, to do this
Yeah.
thing. And that's why it's a similar problem that people have to delegating
Mm-hmm.
is with AI. If you need to be able to scope the project effectively, understand where the constraints are. AI has its own limitations as well that are different from a human. A lot of the how you delegate, how you scope a project, how you think through the decision making process is actually similar to how you actually give a prompt to an AI as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of similar in terms of the bound structure, constraints, how I'm going to make a decision. Here's the detail. Here's enough of the details to work off of. So that's why when you said AI, I'm like, there's ways to use the tools, but that's also why a lot of these tools are not particularly productivity tools. I love them, but a lot of people think to just do those first, and I really consider them like band-aids to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a bigger hammer, like a sledgehammer, but you are not sure what tool you need to use, then it doesn't really matter what tool. Like it doesn't really matter that you have this really powerful productivity tool if you
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to use it and don't know what you're using it for. So that's why we
Mm.
always go back to the nuts and bolts
Yeah.
and use structured deconstruction to take things apart and actually look at, well, so what's going to be an effective way to solve the problem? Let's go find a tool to solve the problem.
Mm.
Not here's a cool new
Gotcha.
tool that I'm trying to sell you and figure it out yourself how to integrate it, right? So that's
Mm.
why we go into the business, take it apart, take a look at
Mm-hmm.
what tools are actually going to be effective to solve the issues in the business.
Mm. Yeah, well, the tool that I want to create or find is non-existent, and
Yeah, I'm kind
but
of
I,
surprised.
yeah, but I mean, there's some things out there. It just doesn't do exactly what I think it should do. But certainly, a VA or something to take care of those things has been the best solution for me. You know, and having them with a FAQ of how to handle stuff,
Yeah,
that's been the best solution for me. But tell me a little bit about. You know, we've talked a lot. You brought out a lot of great stuff. We're having a really great convo here, Eric. But let's talk a little bit about sharing about this unstuck. How do we go from feeling stuck to unstuck? What's some of the key questions you ask to get there?
yeah. Well, feeling stuck is really a byproduct of not of just being stuck in your business, not knowing what to do about it, feeling like no matter what you do, no matter what actions you take, is just going to be consistent, the same as it's always
Mm,
been. And for a lot of folks, that means if they're barely keeping their head above water, it feels like they're just constantly, treading water. They're able to keep their head above water, but just barely. And they just feel
mm-hmm,
stuck because they don't know what to do about it. Right. And that's where, when I talk about having a life preserver, a lifeboat there to come and help you out of that particular moment, because it can be tough when you're in that feeling, when you feel like you're just barely keeping it together, you're not sleeping enough, those and you're not taking care of yourself, and it's been months, it's been years of that. It's tough for a lot of people to break free from that. But really, at the end of the day, it's just there's two options. Either you're going to stay stuck that way and
Mm-hmm.
you can see how long that lasts, right? It could be that your heart gives out. It could be that that your business collapses because you don't have enough time or space to be able to deal with the emergency that happens, right?
Mm.
Because business is all about
Yeah.
there's things that happen, there's things that you're going to have to resolve. It's just normal operating a business. But
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have flexibility in how you're addressing this, if you're barely keeping your head above water, any wave is just going to swamp you, right? If we're going
Mm.
to keep with this analogy.
Yeah.
But if you're not just keeping your head above water, if you get your systems and pieces figured out and do it one step at a time, right? I work with a lot of overwhelmed entrepreneurs, and it's really about just making it a priority, committing to getting this solved and doing what it takes, even if that's only 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a week. Being
Mm-hmm.
able to dedicate that time to problem solve, have someone at your side to be able to do that with you. Because a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time, if you're just trying to do this yourself, it's easy to make excuses and say, oh, well, this client needs something. I have some other emergency out, some other fire drill I have to do, right? It just happens. It's natural, especially when you're tired and exhausted and that decision making strength is really not there anymore.
Mm.
When you don't have that endurance to be able to kind of hold that time sacred for yourself, that's where you want
Mm.
help to really hold that time. Because a lot of the time people will commit to time with someone else to work through
Yeah.
these things. So that's really about when you want to get unstuck. The first piece of the puzzle is saying, enough is enough. I need to get help to get this solved. I haven't been able to solve it myself, or I do want to solve it myself and I need to make it a priority, right? I don't want to make this sound like you have to work with someone like me to get this solved. If you want to try to problem solve this on your own too, that's fine too. But the real priority is around making it a priority for you in your life, because you understand that the consequences are going to get worse. Your health's going to get worse. It could be that your marriage is on the rocks and you're on the brink of divorce because of all the time you're putting into this business. And you say it's for the family, but that doesn't mean the relationship can hold out for much longer, right? I
Mm-hmm.
encounter that quite often too. It
Mm-hmm.
could be the time that you're missing with kids, right? Because your kids are not going to get younger. They're going to keep getting older. They're going to keep growing
Mm.
up, and you're going to lose out on those moments. And those are things you can't get back in your life. And it doesn't mean you need to be, only work, 5 hours a week in business and the rest of the time with your family, right? It's about what is the balance and priorities for yourself. But understanding that time keeps marching on, and if you're feeling overwhelmed and overworked, it's not really going to get better on its own. So creating that priority to say, I need to get this fixed no matter what. That might mean I need to reach out for help. I need to have someone help me through this, or I need to figure it out on my own, because it's not going to get easier. I'm going to get more tired. I'm going to get more overworked. I'm going to get more burnt out. And I need to draw the line in the sand and say, this is it. I was resourceful at building this business. Now I need to get resourceful about moving this into the next stage so that it's manageable, so that I can keep doing it. Because the worst situation is you run yourself into burnout. You've sacrificed your time with your family. You've sacrificed time with your kids. You've sacrificed time with your spouse. And maybe all those things are crumbling along with your business because you didn't make it a priority when it was that pivotal moment to
Mm.
say, enough's enough. I need to make this change.
Yeah. I was just thinking while you were talking about a couple of things. One thing was if if you're a small business owner or you're a solopreneur or even somebody who's working a business inside of a business and you're feeling these feelings, a really good book to read, I think, is Who Not How by Dan Sullivan, which, explains it's a lot benefits of actually talking to somebody who can help you do this to get there quicker and, solve these issues to streamline it so that you can do what you're supposed to do and the things that you enjoy doing rather than you trying to make it all happen yourself and figure it all out yourself and going through trial and error or whatever. And then through our process, when we were talking, I was thinking about, Gino's book Traction, often in there. What is a couple of books that you think would help small business owners to help move them forward?
Oh, I know. Yeah. I have a particularly favorite book that's one of my guiding books, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
a business book.
No, that's
But
fine.
I'll throw in the other business books too, right? And in addition to the ones you shared,
You don't have to.
E-Myth is great, and the
Mm.
Built to Sell is a really good one
Yes, yes,
because
yes, yes.
whether or not you're going
I
to sell
listened to
your
his
business.
podcast.
Oh yeah, that's great. Whether or not you're selling, you still need to be able to systematize it and continue to grow in that way. All
Yes.
systematizing the business is what's going to allow you to move up the level and be able to gain back that time in your schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the odd book that's really a guiding book is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Mm.
Just because I find that, because we talked about the identity, purpose, your mission in life, what you're really here on the earth to do, I find that book one of my kind of guidestone, touchstone books in terms, I read it maybe once a year, every other year or something. It's just, about the kind of your personal journey through life and where things might be distractions from where you're really
Mm.
trying to get to where your priorities are in life. And so I just find that a lovely book to read once in a while. It helps with the identity and the focus and the mission piece of my
Mm.
work.
Well, I'm going to drop links for you in the show notes so that people can get in touch with you. Is there any parting thoughts you want to leave us with?
I think it was probably along the lines of what I shared earlier, but it's really just, if you're feeling this way, if you're feeling overworked and overwhelmed, really think about what it's costing you to not fix it. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people, if you're feeling deep in this pressure
Mm.
and you don't feel like it's getting better, just take that moment of self-reflection and say, what is this costing me not to get it fixed? What am I choosing to for this to cost, where I could go find a solution, I could get help to fix this, but I'm choosing to stay stuck, overwhelmed, and
Mm.
have those consequences of my decision making, right? It's a little bit, I don't want to say heavy handed, but there's a lot of the time the decisions that people need to make about whether it's going to be a priority for you moving forward, whether you want to figure it out yourself, whether you want to get help. It might be that moment to reflect and create some galvanizing ideas in yourself to say,
Yeah.
I really need to get this fixed because I want to keep my marriage alive. I want to see my kids. I want to have a thriving business. I want to have the income that I want and the time. I need to figure out how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Listen, I appreciate you so much. We'll be in touch and we'll communicate a little bit further. I really am grateful for your time you spent with me today.
Great. Thanks, Eddie. It was lovely talking to you today as well.
For more information and monthly topics of interest, please go to transformyourfuture.com and join our newsletter.